There's also some economic issues. There was what was called at the time a panic. Today would be called a recession or a depression. Okay. Now this is connected to the War of 1812. Wars are hugely expensive. Wars are hugely expensive. And so, how do you pay for wars? Well, one of the ways that you pay for wars is you have taxes to go to war, you borrow money from other countries to go to war. But another way to go to war is to the government starts printing money, not just government, but government other entities like banks that have permission to do so from the government start printing money. Okay, this is called inflation. So during the War of 1812, toward the end of the war in 1814, the United States abandoned the gold standard. Okay, this is money redeemable in gold. So money, gold and silver used to be traded as currency, but they also had US dollar and things of that nature that were traded. But the thing is, so if you took in your dollar, you could get gold. And if you took in your gold, you could get dollars, and they were tradable for each other so that the dollar was backed up by gold or silver. Okay, something that was seen as valuable by a lot of people, right? If you offered someone gold, they would probably accept it even all over the world, right? So back then, the American money system was backed up with gold and silver. And but what happens often, even in systems of gold and silver, is entities, usually like banks or the government, they start adding more money into the economy without adding goods and services into the economy, which basically takes the value out of the money, depletes some of the value out of the money. So, like, you could imagine if I took a $20 bill and just started printing up $20 bills and trying to spend them, I'm committing a crime called counterfeiting, which is an area of what's called fraud. I'm trying to steal by getting something for nothing by tricking people. And to do that, I am adding money to the economy, even though there are not more goods and services in the economy. And so I'm tricking the person that I am trying to trade with. I'm defrauding them. I'm stealing from them and hoping that they don't notice. But I'm not only stealing from them, I'm actually stealing value out of everyone's money just a little bit. Now, they may not notice, and it may be a little bit imperceptible to them, meaning they may not see what's going on until later. And sometimes prices will rise, or products, people will not give you as much of the full product. But that process of printing money is called inflation. But gold and silver are almost inflation proof because if you hold gold or silver, no matter how much paper money gets printed, you still have the same amount in your gold or silver. The only way to take away from the amount of value held in your gold and silver is for people to dig up and mine more gold or silver. But there's a limited amount of it in the earth. Okay. So it even when people do dig up and use more gold and silver, and that does a little bit take away from the value of the money, it doesn't do so in the way that just arbitrary printing does, because when you dig up gold and silver, that actually adds something to the economy. It doesn't just print something and say it's valuable. Okay. So During the war, to continue to pay for this very expensive war, the United States government abandoned the gold standard, meaning money no longer had to be backed up by gold or silver. This was to fund the war. This was done by the Second Bank of the United States. Second Bank of the United States. So inflation of money and credit. Credit is when the bank loans you something or gives you money up front so that you pay back that money plus more in the future. Inflation of money and credit, basically printing money, was going on. Now, when you print money, there's a couple different effects that happen, and we've already talked about that. One, the major one, is that you deplete the value of the money held by everyone else. So it's kind of like a secret tax, okay, that happens to money. It also affects the prices. It also has an effect called the Cantillon effect. And the Cantillon effect is that the people who have the money first or sooner, they get to use the money when it's more valuable, and the people who get the money later get the money when it's less valuable. So the government gets to use the money first when it's still more valuable, and people closer to the government get to use, like banks and different organizations, get to use the money first because they're closer to the government. But then when it gets down to like the regular American people or the people who are poor, the money is not as valuable and prices have gone up. Okay, so that's another effect of inflation. But another one is that when there's more money added into the economy, what happens is something called the interest rate gets pushed down lower. Now, the interest rate is a price that is put on people borrowing money. So, like if I wanted to start a business, but I didn't have the money to basically just start the business with cash, I could go sit down with the bank and the bank could give me a loan. Now, the bank is judging by a couple of factors whether or not they think I am going to pay back the money. Now, I'm not just going to pay back the money. The bank, to lend me the money up front, wants me to pay back the money plus a little more in the future because I get to borrow more money now in the present. Now, that's called the interest rate. Now, if the interest rate is higher, that tells me it may not be a good time to borrow money or as much money. But if the interest rate is lower, I may want to borrow money or borrow more money than I otherwise would. But the problem is when a bunch of money is just added into the economy by printing, by inflation, that pushes down the interest rate. And that interest rate tells me, hey, this is a good time to borrow a lot more money to build this business. And a lot of other people all do that at the same time. But the problem is there isn't the right amount of savings in the economy to justify me doing that. So I have been misled into making decisions that are unwise, and I'm going to try to build this business even though there's not a good reason to do it at that time. And that is going to cause me to possibly lose a bunch of money and go out of business once reality catches up. And everyone who works for me will be unemployed, plus their money will buy less. Okay, so that's what happened in the United States. That's what happens in what were called panics, and they were later called depressions. And it's also some of the factors that were at work in the Great Depression as well, is that the government starts printing money, that has these effects that cause people to make other decisions that are not based on reality. It causes a temporary economic boom where there seems to be a lot of growth and prosperity, but that growth and prosperity is actually not built on any reliable foundation. And then reality comes up and there's a bust. It's called the boom bust cycle. And that's what causes that system is a recession or depression is when reality catches up and there's a correction of the market. So what happened in 1819, because the second bank of the US got off the gold standard, the US government started printing a bunch of money to fund the war. They did so through creating a government bank called the Second Bank of the United States. It's allowed to print all this money, act as a central bank for the United States. And then the government allowed banks special immunity to print money, more money than they had in gold. So the government now gave the banks permission to do something that otherwise would have been illegal. The government told banks, hey, because we need more money in the system in order to pay for these things, we are going to make it legal for you to print more money than you actually have in gold. Now, what that means is if you had $10 in gold and the bank is holding that, but the bank is printing way more money, and then you go back to claim your $10 in gold with a $10 bill, but other people are coming back with all these extra dollar bills to claim the same amount of gold, there's more people claiming the gold than there is gold. So therefore, it causes banks to fail because the banks printed more money than gold they actually had. Otherwise, this would have been illegal, but the government allowed banks special immunity to print more money. This caused, after this inflation, caused prices to go up by 25%. So imagine paying 25% more for a lot of things you bought. And then imports, stuff that came in from outside of the country, went up by 70%. So now your money's less valuable, but you're having to pay 25% more on things that are made inside the country and 70% more on things that are brought in from outside the country. Okay, so this is the first, now this is important, not many people know about the Panic of 1819, but this is the first national economic boom-bust cycle. And this will happen because of similar factors throughout US history. And the most famous event where this takes place is the Great Depression, starting in 1929. And the similar factors will lead to the Great Depression, although not many people really understand why the Great Depression happened. But this is what contributes to this. An artificial, which means a fake expansion through inflation, which is the printing of money, an artificial expansion through inflation of the money supply, followed by a rapid contraction when reality catches up with the system. So basically, the government and certain banks that are given special privileges by the government print up a bunch of money. That has economic consequences throughout the whole economy where it seems like there's growth, but then that growth is followed by a crash. And reality catches back up, and usually it goes through unemployment, prices going up quite a bit, money buying a lot less as the system very forcibly regulates itself to be in line with economic reality. So this is what, if you can understand that just a little bit, you understand more than most Americans, and you understand more than most historians and economists. Okay, so people who even claim to study this stuff for a living. And so this is how you know what's going on even with the Great Depression. Similar things happened when you guys were little kids with the 2008 housing crisis, and stuff is going on that is leading to similar issues with that right now. We're just in the boom part of the boom bust cycle. There will be a bust. We don't know exactly when, but all the factors are there for this to happen. And it's a similar factors, government basically printing money into the economy without the same amount of without adding any goods and services. And the result will be an economic recession or depression where these things correct in the future. How long in the future? We don't know. But right now we're in the boom part of things. So that's why you see things like the stock market going up, housing going up, the Bitcoin going up, GameStop going up, is because the government's printed a bunch more money. It's being spent into the system. It looks like there's growth, but then reality will catch up that there's not the savings to justify that growth, and the market will correct. And that will be the bust. A lot of people will lose savings. A lot of people will lose jobs. The dollar won't buy as much, and the market will adjust. And student debt and student loans are another one that are going up. Okay, so studying history and economics can help us understand what's going on in the present time. But this was going on during James Monroe's administration and the Second Bank of the United States.